let's have Microsoft again on the stage, because Valery Jacobs is the technical evangelist at Microsoft, and he's going to talk about realizing the potential of IT using the Things Network on Azure. We're using the Azure cloud for our servers, right? Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Valery Jacobs.
Thank you.
You're all set? You have your own clicker, I see?
I have.
Okay, take it away.
It's working. Yeah. Do I have a screen? So thanks everybody for giving me this opportunity to talk to you as somebody from Microsoft. You know, Microsoft is a commercial organization, and I totally understand that the Things Network is some sort of the opposite of that. But still, there's a lot of stuff we are doing in the field of IoT. And I just want to give you a glimpse of what's going on at Microsoft on this topic. A couple of features will be, a couple of products as well will be mentioned, but it's not a sales pitch. I just want to explain to you what we also do with communities like the Things Network. One of the things that is really impressive for us to see is this community Wienke and the guys have set up. This is really mind-blowing for us, and the amount of time they had to set it up, if you look at today's events, that is really impressive. I really would like to applaud to this guy to be able to make this thing such a big thing. It's really amazing to see. We started off quite a while ago, where we got together at the office at Schiphol, and we discussed, okay, what's the potential for Azure in the whole Internet of Things scheme with regards to the Things Network as well. And we started up to set a couple of technical things like this package Johan made for an NPM package to integrate with Azure. We have a couple of components in Azure which are primarily built for IoT scenarios. I will touch them briefly during this talk. And we simply started off getting a discussion going, doing some things together. And it actually evolved, as everything evolves very quickly within the Things Network ecosystem. This also went quite fast because we got some support from other Azure community members, specifically Azure IT community members like Sander and Jan Willem over here, who put a lot of effort in making a workshop available for the public. So this is a workshop specifically to get TTN networks communicating with an Azure backend to do, let's say, the follow-up steps for IoT. The TTN network, of course, is ingesting the data, but as Microsoft, we actually try to focus on the data itself, what you can do with it, and especially if it's on a large scale. So whenever the scale is really in terms of gigabytes, terabytes, petabytes, that's where we can come in and help you offer a platform that is able to cope with that. So what we actually did is we set up quite a lot of workshop content, and we actually took a road trip from Amsterdam to Romania, and in between we had a lot of events where we helped people through the stuff you already probably know about the Things Network, how it works, and connecting this up to Azure. It was a big success. At most locations where we do these workshops, somehow a gateway pops up. I mean, that's a very common sight, of course, but for us it was amazing to actually see that happening just by doing a workshop somewhere. A very nice effect to witness. And as Microsoft, we see IT as a step forwards in the whole IT industry, actually. So for us, it's a step that makes it able for us to ingest enough data to make the promise of artificial actually real. Because we need a lot more data than we have today to make AI, the way we look at AI, a real thing. Something that knows everything about your surroundings, obviously needs a lot of IoT data. So we see it as one step. Together, we also need another step called Edge. Edge computing was briefly mentioned in the previous talk. For those who didn't witness it, Edge is really important to make this promise a real thing, because we can't do everything in the cloud. That's just a simple truth and a simple fact. But we do see IoT like the food for the brain, for this artificial brain that we think will be the most important thing our industry, our IT and software industry will offer to humankind. So we do a lot of projects at Microsoft. We have a lot of partners involved in the whole IT ecosystem. And we always come back to the questions, okay, it's a challenge. There is a very big security challenge. There's a lot of challenge in the amount of components, the amount of options you have. Many companies suddenly have to deal with hardware. They were not used to deal with hardware, so that's a new thing for a lot of people. We set up hardware labs at Microsoft to help out in that regard, because we have a big partner ecosystem on the hardware side as well. So there were a lot of challenges still, and we tried to tackle them with Azure IoT services. And not only services, not only projects, we try to combine them as well to make it easier to understand how to use them. So that's a very important message for me today to explain a little bit about this. We have solutions on the platform as a service side with Azure and the components within it, but we also recently announced a couple of software as a service solutions, IoT SaaS in this case, called Microsoft IT Central. I'll show a little bit about it later on. And we have some stuff on the Dynamics part, because integrating with ERP in many of the projects we have seen is a very important component. And we have some projects on that part as well. There's a lot of stuff in between, a lot of components. Obviously, we can't go through the list in the time we have for this session. I'll give just a quick glimpse. So this is like a very simplified version of the TTN network. We have the nodes, you have the gateways, and there's a lot of compute in the middle that makes the routing and the handling, etc. working. I guess most of you know this picture by now, since it has been explained in a couple of sessions during this event. The next step actually is to make sure that this data that is being ingested is being forwarded to somewhere, because the data needs to be analyzed. For example, machine learning might be part of your scenario, or big scale might be a thing you have to deal with. So it makes sense to have like a backplane for the data to end up in. And if you look at this chart, this is basically an overview of a couple of Azure IoT services, or simply Azure services which relate to IoT, which are applicable to IoT, where you see IoT Hub being one of the main components. This is the entry point for IoT data. So the bridge would actually bridge the data and push it forward to this cloud, as an example. And there are many components able to cope with hundreds and millions of messages per second if needed. And you see like the big lines, they emphasize there's a lot of data coming in, but these components like a stream analytics are actually meant to filter the data and make it more useful, more usable in the backplane of an architecture. And at the end, there has to be some app to make this data useful, to turn data into intelligence, and to be able to make intelligent decisions on the IoT data you get. And there's also a flow backwards, of course, because two-way communication often is just a really necessity to make this thing work. And we have a couple of extra components to make architecture work, like Event Grid, where basically anything that happens in this cloud environment can be a trigger for some other component to react on it. It's like a serverless kind of thing. And of course, with Azure Functions, we see a lot of serverless being used in IT, because the scale is not always predictable, and you don't want to pay continuously for all the resources that you have to spin up potentially. So looking at the various forms we have, Microsoft IT Central is simply a web application where you very quickly can set up your IoT project. It's not very flexible. We have set up a couple of things so you can define your data sets, etc. But it's quite fixed in that extent. Azure IT Suite actually is something far more flexible. It's meant as a starting point for a customized project. And at the Edge side, we have IoT Edge SDK, which is capable of making the cloud and edge computing a real thing. And I will elaborate a little bit on this one. If you look at IT Central, as I mentioned, it's fully hosted. You don't have to set up anything. Your cloud project, your IT project, can actually be spun up in a couple of minutes. You simply go to a website. Let me quickly show you an example of what it looks like. Here, this is the website. You can customize it. You select the device type, and you can say, I want to have a real or a simulated device. I set up one of the devices. It's actually upstairs protecting my bag, so whenever somebody takes my bag, I will see some bumps in these lines. These are like geographical data. So this was really simple to set up. I actually did it 15 minutes before the session started. If you want to dig in a little bit deeper, this is an example of one of the pre-configured solutions we have in Azure. This is Azure IT Suite. What we do here is we simply collect, based on our experience of IoT and the projects we've done in practice, we collected all the go-dos and the don'ts and the do's, and made this web application. It's open source. You can simply download the code and customize it to your liking, to use whatever you need. And if you look in our portal, you will see actually that when you simply visit this website, you press the big plus sign, and you'll get a couple of options visible there, like a machine learning scenario. Asset management will be coming very soon. Oh, let's now wait for it to reload. Yeah. It will show you a couple of options. Here, this is the plus button. And these are currently the things you have available. So there's predictive maintenance. This is simply meant to kickstart your IT project and to make sure that you can understand what is going on the Azure side to make IoT a real thing. That was IT Suite. So there's also microservices being involved in the solution. We see microservices, the approach, the architectural approach, as like a safety net for the developers in IT solutions. Many of the companies we have seen were struggling with the scope as soon as they were successful, and microservices is really something we recommend to dig into. Service Fabric is just an example how to implement it. IT Suite is using that to build the backplane to handle all the events coming in. But there are many options, but the main message is use it, consider using it, because it will make your life easier when there's success going on in your company. Well, security is a very interesting thing. I think it's the main threat for IT in general. We could totally fail on IoT with not doing security right. This website shows us that. It indexes basically IT devices, gives you an opportunity to get the IP address. It's very simple. You go to the IP address and you search, for example, on a webcam brand or white label from Chinese brands. Then you get an IP address. Then you see the real brand name as the metadata, because that's what those devices are broadcasting on the network. You go to the website, download the manual. You look up the default admin password, and you're in. I tried it several times on stage. 3 out of 4 times I was actually able to get into a dentist, a farmer location, and some shop. And I had to stop it because it's illegal to do it on stage. I'm not going to show it today. But this is a real threat, and it's really difficult to fix this because there are consumers involved, and consumers don't listen, consumers don't read manuals. I don't update my router on a monthly basis. There are routers actually being sold for which the firmware doesn't exist anymore. They simply lost the source code, so nobody's able to update them. The cheaper brands especially, but there are millions and millions of them in the field. So this is a very interesting challenge. It's something we need to work on really hard. We try to do it as Microsoft. We simply expose all the learnings we had in IT securities. We publish a lot of documents on the stuff we have seen and the things we think we should be doing with regards to IT security specifically. And you see that many roles are involved. The hardware builders, the distributors, the software builders, everybody's involved in this whole big chain of security threats actually that we have. An interesting example that I really would like to mention is one of our partners, Intrinsic ID. They use SRAM PUF. Who's familiar with SRAM PUFs? Interesting. I never heard of it, so it's nice to see a couple of people actually being familiar with it. This is a picture of SRAM. It's a type of RAM that many IT devices already have. It's a very common thing to have next to your CPU. The interesting thing is if you put a current on these memory chips, they actually show a pattern. So if you read out the value, whenever there's a current being put on here, they read out a pattern of zeros and ones, of course, because this is not quantum computing yet. And this pattern is actually very structured. It's predictable. There are some changes in there whenever you read it, but there is an algorithm that makes it possible to actually use this as like a key, like something that is very intrinsic to this piece of hardware. And based on this characteristic, they made some interesting software which is actually able to have this device generate its own main key. And with that source key, they're actually able to generate all the other keys that are needed to make security a real thing in IoT. So this is one example of where security can be disrupted and changed completely by having the device itself already being able to identify and secure itself to some extent. So it's really interesting to see those things happen. And again, this is really a necessity to make things work. Very quickly about the edge. Why is it important? Obviously because not everything can be decided in the cloud. I mean, the automotive is a very obvious example, but there are many more examples where some data might not even be allowed to leave, for example, a manufacturing plant. A lot of reasons why it's an interesting thing to look at. That's the reason why we made the IT Edge Gateway, which is actually based on containers, pushing containers to the client device, like a gateway device. What's interesting as well is that we try to make this a little bit more involved in the fact that we also push machine learning algorithms to those devices, because we think that's also necessary to make sure that the learning the cloud does, the big brain that the cloud is able to construct, it's something you can download. It's a smaller chunk of data. It needs less CPU cycles to be used. So that's something where the edge computing environment can leverage together with the cloud. And there's like a symmetry, like this chart is indicating. So that's where we're currently working at Microsoft. And we see this actually as a full era. So there's the mainframe, the client server. We have the mobile and cloud era, of course, currently going on quite quick. And the edge actually is the following thing, where everything is computed. Everywhere around us, there's compute going on. And it's not only the cloud. And that's coming from Microsoft, those statements. So that's interesting to see. in the interest of time, very quickly, we have a lot of data crunching services. This is really an elaborate topic. We don't have time for it to cover it fully. But if you're interested in, okay, how can I handle those terabytes of data? How can I get the intelligence out of it? We have a lot of resources to show you how we have done it in practice with our partners. A lot of references to look into. And this chart actually still applies. It's almost 2 years old, but it's still something that applies really well in terms of what we are doing in this field. A lot of manufacturing going on, but all these verticals actually are spinning up IoT very quickly currently. And we see a couple of disruptive forces actually moving this forward, which also are quite interesting. And they're not really in the future, they're actually in the near future, and some of them are already here. Just as an example, we have a company in our partner list, Van Doren Engineering, in the south of the country, and they actually use HoloLens for an IoT scenario. You might think, okay, how does that apply? Does that make sense? Well, in their case, if you look at this video, what they are doing, of course, HoloLens is interesting if you want to see a manual when you're doing maintenance. That's one of the obvious examples of applying HoloLens in IoT, maybe. But they went a little bit further. What they do here is they simply virtualize a real machine to do, for example, line checks, which can be very cumbersome because you need to go back to the PLC controller and then back to the device. What they can do is actually virtualize that interface, put the buttons on exactly the position of the machines themselves, and with voice commands or gestures, they're able to line check this whole system, which can be a burden if you're in a big manufacturing plant and you need to go through all these devices and make sure that everything is connected up really nice. And as you could see in the last part of the video, they're actually able to control the whole thing by simply shouting out instructions. And it works quite well. It's also being tested in environments with a lot of noise, and they're doing a quite good job on this. And they get a lot of attention from their customers as well that are looking to do similar things. They even have animations where you can see the value. So this is just an example of some weird stuff that's been going on in IoT, which might not seem very related, but still, for this company, this is a very relevant innovation. Another disruptive thing we see coming, and we are working on as Microsoft as well, and all the big guys are working on this, is quantum computing. It will have an impact on IoT as well, because we talked about all this data and the intelligence. We actually need far more compute power to be able to do what we envisioned to be doing with IoT, and quantum computers can play a big role in this, well, quite soon actually, because there's a lot of attention and budget going on in this field. And I mean, the benefit for those who didn't witness it, the promise of quantum computing is like a 100 million-fold performance increase for specific algorithms, that is. So we're actually looking forward to having this available and useful, and something we can improve artificial intelligence in general with. Another thing with regards to security, it's one of my last slides, is blockchain. I think blockchain might be a useful thing for IT in the context of security. It could be used to secure communication between devices, obviously, and there are specific implementations already. But one interesting movement I'm seeing growing a little bit currently is also help consumers by blockchain. So one example of that is you buy a device. This device is owned by the company that produced it. When you buy it, you set up a transaction in the blockchain. And that transaction in the blockchain also means that your metadata about your router login information, for example, can also be stored on the blockchain. The interesting effect people are looking into is that it's possible by simply taking the ownership of this device, that it will be automatically configured very securely. The blockchain knows your credentials, or at least has a way to configure this device without you being able to remind to change the default admin passwords, without you actually knowing how to do it specifically, because many consumers don't know how to do this. So there's an interesting project going on to see whether blockchain can actually solve this consumer IoT issue to some extent. It will be a big challenge, but I think it will be a very interesting one to see develop. I mentioned a lot of things actually, and very quickly. So I have a link over here called aka.ms/Valery IoT. If you want to see with a little bit more detail what is going on with all these topics, there are a lot of links on this website. How am I doing on time? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. A couple of things I would like to show as well. With regards to Azure IoT Suite, I mentioned it's like a playing ground where you can customize the whole thing to your liking. So one example of this is that one of the platforms, it's also a part of the conference, there was a session on resin.io to be able to manage your gateway devices. So this is a nice example of an environment that you can combine with Azure IoT Suite. IoT Suite will visualize the data, make sure that you have something functional in terms of IoT, but in terms of managing devices or managing the gateways, you can integrate it with resin.io because they have APIs, for example, to update the device state. This is also something that IoT Suite itself provides, but maybe you don't like it, maybe you want to combine those two things together. This is a very interesting example where you could do this. In terms of machine learning, I guess most of this audience is not that active in the field of data science, but I think it's a very important role to include in your IoT projects whenever a lot of data is involved. And just to give you a glimpse of what these people are using if they are looking at Azure ML, this is a picture of Azure ML Studio. Well, actually, it's not a picture, it's a demo. And what you see here is the way these people work is they ingest data. You see at the top of this screen that there's data coming in. If it's readable, import data. And they simply push the data through algorithms. They split up the data to push it partly through an algorithm and a scoring model. And at the end, you know, okay, was the predictions this model made, were they good? Were they useful? If not, they can change the parameters. And it's even possible to do parameter sweeping, which means that the machine will retry and optimize all the settings of the algorithm. And at some point, you get a very high level of confidence in your predictions. And this can be very useful in IT projects. And what's interesting to note is the fact that here below, you can actually expose this model, expose this intelligence, so to speak, as a service, publish it, then you have an API of that same service, and integrate that in your IoT Suite implementation or in your customized implementation. And you get the benefit of a lot of cloud-based number crunching and a very simple interface to integrate this intelligent model. Let's see. Here's the link I mentioned with the summary of the stuff I included in this session. So that's it from my side. I'm wondering, are there any questions? I have one call to action, actually, and that is please contact us, please contact me. I'm walking through the venue the whole day. If you're interested in one of these services, but you have questions, you want some support, we have a team available, free of charge. They will help you with doing architectural sessions. They will help you explaining what's going on over here. So please do that. We are waiting for you to contact us. Thank you for your attention. And
thank you very much, Valery Jacobs. Yeah, sure. Any questions, or else I'll have one? Yes? Anyone? Anyone? Let me just check if I got this right. I can imagine for an IoT platform, it can be very interesting to use Azure. You know, you can scale up your processing power and storage quite easily. But the other way around, why would it be interesting for Microsoft to go into IoT? Because, well, we have low bandwidth, so not much data, and the price of data storage is going, well, close to zero. And most of the processing is now going to the edge. Yeah. So, or is it the artificial intelligence layer you might build in the back? Well, why would it be interesting for Azure to go into IoT?
Yeah, that's a question totally makes sense. The biggest component which is of interest to us is, of course, the data component, because what we see in IoT especially is that the size of the data is really large scale. So in terms of storage, that's not the biggest issue. You need it cheaply, and that's something we can offer, but that's not too uncommon for public cloud providers. The thing is, what do you have to do with the data? The resources you need to actually do the number crunching are mind-bogglingly expensive if you have to put them on-prem. I mean, that's obvious. But this is actually where we focus on in Azure, to make it easy to do it and to have very flexible CPU resources, very flexible resources to transport the data. Because keep in mind, pushing the data within a cloud environment, like a terabytes from A to B, is very expensive. We have services that actually let the data where they are, and we move the compute resources to the data. Sounds like a very technical thing, but it actually helps us improve the performance like 1,000-fold. So that's where we think we have this really differentiator. Apart from the fact that those interfaces, visualizing the data, is always underestimated, I would say. And that's where we have a lot of ways to do it with Power BI and a lot of services. I don't want to pitch products, but that's something we focus on as well. Okay. And we are really aware of the fact that with IoT, it's not the throughput of data. It's not the devices. We're not going to sell Microsoft IT devices. Totally wouldn't make sense because we have a big ecosystem, including the stuff the partners from the Things Network are building as well. We just want to include everybody. That's also why we do a lot of open source.
Okay, so we challenge you in processing data, not just storage.
Yeah, that's the main part.
Okay. Yeah. Any other questions, remarks, theories? Yeah, over there. Somewhere here? Oh, yeah, there you are.
That's me.
Hello, who are you?
Hi, I'm Mark Schutte. Earlier in the presentation, you showed a link, TTN Azure IoT Hub. Is that the actual central location where to get the link between TTN and Azure? Because I've been playing around with the Raspberry Pi and Windows 10 on it, and it was really easy to get the data generated by a device like that into the IoT Hub. Yeah. Is that the same thing that is now being presented or being written in that NPM repository?
So the slide actually that mentioned this very explicitly was the one where I showed this bridge feature. The bridge feature is actually making this bridge, I have too many slides, making this bridge between the Things Network, what they put out as the integration feature actually within the Things Network, which you can push forward. That's actually where this integration takes place. It also includes integrating device identity and device security. So those two aspects are represented in there. It's also represented in the lab content. I have the link for at the end. Here you can actually see all the code, all the stuff we have done to make another type of bridge based on .NET or .NET Core. So there are many ways to do it, actually. Yeah.
Okay, so that is actually the main starting point.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Okay. Were there some comments over here, or you just cracking jokes? Oh, okay. Very well. Anyone else? This is your chance to ask a question to Microsoft. Hey, isn't that neat?
Okay.
No? Anyone? Okay, thank you very much. Valery Jacobs.